Today we're going to be talking about some other sources of air pollution, as well as the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act was an important part of legislation enacted in the 1960s, when our air pollution was frankly just really bad. At this point, people realized there was effects to this occurring, and they decided to act on that. When these regulations were put into place, it has decreased our air pollution by 57%, which is very significant. There's still work to be done, and these regulations need to stay in place and or be improved in order to continue that work. But it does show that with effort, we really can make a difference in our ecosystems. So here's a picture of the Smoky Mountains National Park. The first picture is in 1998, and so the Clean Air Act had already been in place for over 30 years. We still had a lot of air pollution, though, that occurred, and so you can see how it diminishes your ability to see far out along the mountain ranges. And that's because of the smog that's located there. The next picture is in 2015, so a couple years ago already, but you can see how much the air quality has improved over time. Here's a picture of Manhattan in the 1970s versus more recently today, the same view. And so you can tell the difference in air quality. In which air would you rather breathe? So with air, one of the things that can happen is indoor air pollution can actually affect you more than outdoor air pollution. That's because it can become very concentrated. And something can happen called sick building syndrome. And sick building syndrome, this occurs in buildings that are not well ventilated, like the windows do not open or the air conditioning systems do not work well. So like school buildings. So with this, some of the things you'll experience is headaches, fatigues, your eyes will get irritated because of the particulates that are suspended in the air. And if you have windows that open, it's good to open them every now and then and flush that out. And so in our particular building, actually, we're pretty lucky that our windows do open. So we're able to open some of the windows and we can flush that out when the weather is well. And they have updated some of our air conditioning systems. They're not perfect. But there's other schools in our district that are not so lucky. Another thing to be aware of that can occur as far as air pollution within our homes is the existence of radon gas. Radon gas is a colorless, tasteless, odorless, radioactive gas that normally comes from our Earth's crust. It gets into our homes through cracks in the foundation or where pipes run into our homes. And what it can do, because it's radioactive, is it can alter your DNA, causing things like cancer. So lung cancer is the second biggest killer in the United States. And they link it to radon gas. So one of the things you can do is if you own your home, you can get a radon gas test kit. They're pretty cheap. And the Department of Health sometimes offers them for as little as $3. So you put this in your basement, you collect your samples, and then you send them off to get your test results. If radon is present, there are mitigating things that you can do, like find the cracks in the foundation, or there are things that you can put in that will circulate air and keep it from accumulating in your home. But you do want to be aware, and especially when you go to buy homes. When you go to buy homes, you can ask the homeowner to run a radon test before you purchase the home, and that responsibility is put on them. And then if radon is found, they have to fix it before you buy the house. So it's always a really good idea to keep that in mind when you go to buy homes. So here is just a diagram showing how this gets into your home. So you can see through cracks in the foundation is the most common. Even if you have windows in your basement that aren't sealed well or around in pipes. And it doesn't just stay in your basement. So if you have a crawl space and you don't go down there and you feel like you don't have to worry, it can come up into the upper levels of a home through the showers. The gas is suspended in the liquid in there. So it is something to be aware of. It does happen in our area. So if you haven't had a radon test in your home in a very long time, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and run one. Another kind of pollution that you wouldn't necessarily think of as air pollution is noise pollution, but because noise travels through the air, it is considered a kind of air pollution. So a sound of any kind is noise, and so some of this noise is unnecessary or it's very high, and that can cause things like loss of hearing. It can increase your blood pressure and, of course, stress you out. On the other side, it can also keep you from sleeping. So if you live in a city and you're not used to those noises will probably keep you up at night for quite some time. So with noise pollution, this is what is happening. We have decibels, which is how we measure these, and different decibels can cause damage to your ears. Inside your ears are these tiny little hairs. You can see them in the picture below. And these little hairs, over time, as we listen to loud things, slowly bend and break. And it's at such a slow rate that we usually don't notice it until it's the accumulation of all this. And then you realize, hey, I have to turn my TV up higher to hear it, or my radio up higher to even hear it. And that's the accumulation of these little tiny damages that occur over our lifespan. There is some concern about the use of earbuds and using loud music that way, that over time you might damage these inner hairs and have hearing loss. So permanent deafness can occur as a result of continuous exposure at 120 decibels. So continuous exposure means regular exposure. One time is not going to really do anything. It's the accumulation of these exposures. So if you look at 120 decibels, we're looking at a rock and roll concert, especially if you're up near the speakers, a jet engine, a rocket engine. So these lower things, car horn, unless you're right next to it, all of these are unlikely to have any effect, but these loud noises, of course, will. So now we're back to our Clean Air Act, passed in 1963 to improve the quality of our atmosphere. And what this act does is it limits emissions of pollutants. So it puts limits on how much emissions cars can make. Even industry is limited to some extent, though there are a lot of loopholes that industry can use to get around the regulations. Sets standard for air quality, what is considered acceptable and what is not. It has legal framework for suing industries that break the rules to make them financially responsible for that. And it provides funding for air pollution control, so what we can do to fix our problems. So there's a big question about, is it worth the cost? Because this is really a balancing act between what does industry need to do to keep our environment clean versus what are they willing to do to bring their business within. So there's always two sides to the coin when we're talking about these things. You need jobs in your area. And if industries put their foot down and say, no, we're not going to pay for these regulations, then they're not going to come to the United States and do business. And if you don't have a job, you're unlikely to care about the environment at that point. On the other side, if all the industries come and we let them do whatever they want and our ecosystem is destroyed, that's going to equal problems with our health. And if we don't have our health, we can't work. So there's a lot of issues here, and it's kind of a balancing act when we look at it. But we do have ways to clean the air. So here's some more before and after pictures with the Clean Air Act. So 1968 versus 2005, there's a big difference there in air quality. All right, here's some more that you can see years apart. And so here is some data. So data about our air quality over time. Things have gotten a lot better, especially lead. We've gotten really smart about lead. We figured out that it's really, really bad for us and stopped using it in things like paint. Carbon monoxide, we gotten better, so our vehicles produce less and less carbon monoxide, which will, kill you. And then the nitrous dioxide and sulfur dioxide, the components of acid rain, have also decreased. Again, we still have work to do, but we can do it. This graph shows we are capable of reducing this and still doing business within our country. So major accomplishments of our Clean Air Act, catalytic converters were put in place, so some people like that and some people don't. But when they were put in place, it greatly diminished the amount of emissions that came from vehicles. They put lead out of our gasoline. That's why when you go to put gas in your car, it says unleaded gasoline, because there used to be lead in it, which was terrible. And industry and power plants have reduced their pollutants as well, though we still have some work to do there. They're using technology of things called scrubbers. And I'm going to show you what those look like and how they work really briefly. So here is a typical scrubber. So how a scrubber works is the dirty air from industry, so whatever they're producing, goes through the scrubber, and they put these near the smokestacks, right? And then there's a jet of water. And what the water does is basically any pollutants in the water are going to be basically submerged in the water, okay? So they're going to be submerged and mixed with the water, and the water carries them down here at the bottom of the scrubber. And then the cleaner air comes out, and there is a mesh pad here to collect anything else that it didn't collect in the water. And so the idea is that this comes out cleaner at the end. So this is pretty simple. And then what they would do with this water down here is they would actually let it evaporate, and there would be the sludge left over. Now, sludge is highly toxic, so that's another issue in and of itself, but it's better than pumping it out into the air. The problem is industries would have to pay to put these on their smokestacks, and they're not too keen on paying extra for anything. All right, another thing that we can use, which is even more high-tech and works really well, is an electrostatic precipitator. So electrostatic because it's using an electric charge to make something like static electricity, and it precipitates out the pollution. So cement factories use these, and coal-burning power plants, because they produce a lot of particulates. So the gas comes in, and then electricity is used in here, like I said, on these little metal collection plates. So they're charged, and when they're charged, any of the little particulates that also have their own charge stick to that, and then the clean gas comes out, and it works pretty darn good. And then when they switch the charge, these little particulates fall off, and they go down in what's called a hopper, so they collect that as a solid. So there's no water involved, which is good because it prevents further water pollution, right? It's just solids. They're just by charge. So it works really well. But again, these companies have to pay to put these on their buildings, which they don't want to pay that extra money if they don't have to, if they can get away with it. So something else we need to talk about in regards to air pollution is the ozone layer. So with the ozone layer, we have some good news. Again, lots of improvement, but we still have a ways to go. So ozone is a pollutant in the troposphere, but in the stratosphere, it protects us. So in the troposphere, our layer, vehicles produce ozone, and if we breathe that stuff in, it's really bad, can cause mutations in our DNA, but up in the stratosphere, good. So it depends on where it is. So chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, which used to be used in everything from hairspray cans to your air conditioners and refrigerators. Those chemicals that were used to cool things off like that or to propel things, they found out destroyed ozone. And so as we were using these in a society, these chemicals are floating up in the atmosphere and created an ozone hole. Luckily, this hole occurred over Antarctica, because if it had occurred over a country where people were inhabiting there would be huge numbers of skin cancer and people just dying. All right. So the ozone hole, luckily, occurred there, and it allows for UV radiation to come in, which causes skin cancer. The good news is we figured out how bad CFCs were, and we banned them. So part of the Montreal Protocol Treaty, signed in 1987, said to cut CFC use by 95%, which the United States did do. We did a really good job cutting it out, and industry did not want to do it. And what happened is the public found out about this and got really upset. And it really shows you the power of the dollar, like what you have power-wise as far as what you buy. So the public started to not buy products that had CFCs very purposefully because of this hole in the ozone. And because they didn't buy those products, companies were forced to find something else, because otherwise they weren't going to make money. So they did. They found alternatives that were not as bad for the ozone layer. And since then, ozone, the CFCs, they last for 30 years up in the atmosphere. So it wasn't an immediate fix. But what we're seeing now in more recent years is the hole in the ozone is shrinking. It still exists, and even seasonally you see it more than other seasons. But if you look over here, the red is the 1970s, and then 2007, which is the reason is most recent on this, you can see that hole, depending on the time of year, has greatly reduced. And this is great news because we've actually fixed one of our problems over time. So here we go again, the hole in the ozone. You can look at this red line as far as what was going on. So we were using these products and mostly in the 1960s and 70s, and we stopped using them, but of course the hole was still significant for a long time because those chemicals last for 30 years. So if you're using them in the 70s, They were still active in the early 2000s, right? And then since then, what we're seeing is this increase in our ozone. It's